Have you ever heard of parents who mortgage their children for their selfish interests? This story will reveal another side of parental greed. Watch till the end. Once upon a time, in a small village called Ayeduno, there lived a woman called Wumi. Everyone knew Wumi as the woman who never saw money and looked away. She had an insatiable appetite for money and all it provides. Wumi was a chubby, beautiful woman, her eyes always darting around like she was looking for the next opportunity to make quick money. She owed nearly everyone in the village, from the fish sellers to the tailors to the abo sellers by the river. And yet, every time Wumi found herself in trouble over unpaid debt, she would find a way to slip her way out of it. She would promise things that would never happen. Some villagers believed her, while others shrugged, accepting that they would probably never see their money again. She was always scheming on new ways to get people to lend her money or coming up with dubious ideas to make it. One time, Wumi started a business selling Kayamata oil that she claimed could secure any man of your choice and heal any sickness, from a headache to a broken heart. She mixed all sorts of strange ingredients together and packed them in a small dusty bottle, selling them to anyone who listened. For a while, people believed in her potions, but as time went on, they realized it was just cooking oil and bay leaf with some color that she conjured. When her scam got out, they nearly beat her to stupor, but she ran to the king's palace and was spared. You will be thinking that she stopped afterwards. No, she didn't. She simply moved on to the next scheme. But even as she schemed and hustled, Wumi had one treasure she guarded fiercely, her only daughter, Fumilayo. Fumi was the opposite of her mother in almost every way. While Wumi was loud and full of grand schemes, Fumi was gentle, quiet, and reserved. Her beauty was well known throughout. Ayedunu knew her for her kind nature, and that made her even more popular. She was hardworking, respectful, and never caused any trouble. Wumi knew that with a daughter like Fumilayo, she could one day strike gold. She saw her daughter as her ticket to wealth, a way out of her ever growing debts. The opportunity arrived one dry season when a wealthy farmer named Odun came into town. Odun was an old man in his late 60s with a calm, withered face and a quiet but strong presence. He owned large stretches of farmland just outside Ayedunu and was known for his riches and his simple lifestyle. People respected Odun. He was a man of few words, a widower who had lost his only wife years ago and never remarried. Now, as he grew older, he found himself wanting companionship, someone to share his last years with and bring some warmth to his otherwise lonely life. When Wumi heard that Odun was looking for a wife, her eyes sparkled with excitement. She saw him as a golden goose, her long awaited chance to get wealthy without lifting a finger, a golden opportunity to clear all her debts. She didn't care that Odun was much older than Fumilayo, nor did it matter to her that her daughter had dreams and hopes of her own. To her, Fumi's dreams were irrelevant. All that mattered was her plan to marry Fumi off to Odun and get out of poverty at last. Wumi began to devise her plan. She spent days preparing herself, practicing her words in front of a mirror, dressing in her best clothes, and polishing every charm she could summon. She visited Mr. Odun one evening under the guise of delivering fruits, knowing well that he would be home after his long day on the farm. Ah, Baba Odun, my greetings to you, sir, she said sweetly, setting down the basket with a wide grin. I brought you some fruits and nuts. It's nothing, just a small token of appreciation, Baba. Odun, ever the polite man, thanked her, though he saw through her act. He knew Wumi's reputation well. Everyone knew Wumi, but he listened as she made small talks, speaking of village life, of how difficult it was to raise a daughter alone, and of how she longed for Fumi to find a good, stable man. Baba Odun, Wumi finally said, her voice dropping to a whisper, I must be honest with you. I have raised Fumi to be humble, respectful, and adorable girl. She would make a wonderful wife, and she would take care of you, especially in your old age. Odun raised his brows slightly, but he didn't say anything, allowing Wumi to continue. She rambled on about Fumi's virtues, her hard work, her respectfulness, her obedience. She painted a picture so rosy that no one would doubt. In truth, Fumi had no idea of her mother's plans. She didn't know that her mother saw her only as an exit from poverty. Fumi had always dreamed of love, of finding someone who saw her as more than just a prize to be won. She had grown up watching her mother's constant deceit and she longed for something genuine. Fumi dreamed of leaving Ayeduna someday, of becoming a medical doctor, to see the world beyond the fields and the dusty path, to perhaps find someone to share her dreams with. But Wumi's words had taken hold. Odun began to think about the comfort a young wife might bring him. He saw that he could have someone by his side, someone who would care for him in his old age, perhaps even give him a bit of happiness. It wasn't love, but it was companionship, and to Odun, that seemed close enough. One day, Wumi called Fumilayo into their small, dimly lit room and sat her down with a stern look on her face. Fumi, there is something important I need to tell you, she began, her voice as sweet as syrup. You are old enough now, and I have found a husband for you, a very good husband. Fumi's heart sank. She felt a cold wave of fear wash over her as she looked at her mother's expression. This was not what she wanted, not how she'd imagined her life unfolding. Mommy, who? Who is the man? Fumi stammered, her mind racing. Odun, Wumi replied with a smile. The wealthy farmer. He's a good man, Fumi, and he can give you a good life. He will care for you and provide for you and ensure you have everything you need. Fumi shook her head, unable to believe that she was hearing that from her mother. She tried to protest, to explain that this wasn't what she wanted, but Wumi, the greedy woman, wouldn't hear it. Fumi, shut up, please. This is a blessing. Her mother insisted, her voice growing sharp. You will marry him, and he will make me proud. This is your duty as my daughter. You will marry him. He is rich. He will help us. Are you not tired of being poor? What do you know about love? Eh? It was because of love that I'm in this condition. If I had married Day Olani, I would be wealthy by now. But I chose your father because I loved him. Now look at where it brought me. Forget about love. With tears in her eyes, Fumilayo, her daughter, realized that her fate had been sealed. There was no escaping her mother's determination. Wumi, the greedy woman, had chosen wealth over her own daughter's future and happiness, and there was nothing Fumi could do to change her mind. Days later, the village gathered for the wedding. Fumi stood beside Odun, her face pale and her eyes full of despair. She felt like a bird trapped in a cage, her wings clipped by her own mother's greed. As she exchanged vows with the old farmer, her heart broke a little more with every word. She had been given no choice, no chance to seek the love she had always dreamt of. Once the wedding was over, Fumi found herself in Odun's vast isolated farm. Life there was quiet, and she spent her days in silence, feeling the weight of loneliness pressed down on her. Her only company was Morenike, Odun's sister in law, and her young son, Femi, who was a bit older than Fumi. Morenike was kind and often tried to comfort Fumi, but she could do little to ease the girl's pain. Every morning, Fumi woke up to the crowing of roosters and bleating of goats, sounds that reminded her of the life she never wanted. She thought of the life she could have had, a life filled with love and adventure, and the bitterness in her heart grew. As the days went by, Fumi's misery only deepened. Her dreams felt shattered, and the life she was now living seemed like a harsh sentence, filled with silence and endless stretches of farmland. The mornings, which should have been fresh and bright, felt dull and heavy, and the isolation left her feeling more like a ghost than a bride. Mr. Odun, on the other hand, was baffled by her distant, guarded behavior. He'd expected that with time, Fumi would settle in and accept her new role as his wife. Maybe even come to appreciate the stable life he was offering her. Odun had hoped for warmth, a companion to ease his loneliness, and perhaps someone to care for him in his old age. Instead, he found himself an 18-year-old stubborn girl. Whenever he tried to speak to her, Fumi would simply nod, answer in the briefest way possible, or quietly excuse herself. She spent hours outside, often wandering near the edge of the farm or staring off into the horizon, as if yearning for something far beyond her reach. The only time Fumi ever seemed at ease was when she was around Femi, Morenike's son, that is, Mr. Odun's nephew. Femi was a few years older than her, with a quiet and reserved nature that matched her own. He often helped Odun around the farm, tending to the goats, fetching water, and mending fences. Fumi found herself drawn to his gentleness and the silent understanding that seemed to pass between them. They often exchanged small glances, and though they rarely spoke, each understood the other's quiet suffering. Fumi felt a warmth around Femi that she couldn't explain, a comfort she had never felt with Odun. She knew she was married, and her mother's voice echoed in her mind, warning her to keep her place as a dutiful wife. But her heart whispered something different, reminding her of the life and love she had been denied. One evening, Fumi and Femi found themselves alone in the field. They were walking in silence, side by side, when Femi finally spoke, his voice low and gentle. Are you happy here, Fumi? He asked, his eyes fixed on the ground. Fumi felt her throat tighten. She wanted to lie, to say she was content, but the truth was too heavy to hold back. No, she replied quietly. I feel like a prisoner here. This this isn't the life I wanted. Femi nodded, understanding her. I know how you feel. Sometimes I think about leaving too, but I can't leave my mother. She's all I have. They stood there in silence, the weight of their shared struggle hanging between them. Fumi felt an ache in her chest, a longing that she could not deny. She wanted freedom and she wanted love, the kind that made life worth living. And standing there with Femi, she felt a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, her dreams weren't entirely lost. As the days passed, Fumi found herself growing closer to Femi. Their friendship deepened, and though they both knew the risk, they couldn't resist the pull they felt towards each other. They would meet in secret, stealing moments away from Odun's watchful eyes. It was dangerous, thrilling, and wrong in every way. Yet, Fumi felt more alive with Femi than she had ever in her entire life. But such secrets could not stay hidden forever. One evening, Odun caught sight of Fumi and Femi standing too close. He felt a cold rage flare up within him. His wife, his much younger bride, was sharing stolen glances and whispered words with another man, his own nephew, as a matter of fact. He kept his anger silent and watched for any further signs of betrayal. The tension in the household grew with Odun's suspicion mounting day by day. Fumi noticed his watchful eyes, the way he lingered near the doorway whenever she and Femi were together. The warmth of her secret romance was overshadowed by a looming fear, and she knew it was only a matter of time before Odun confronted her. One night, unable to bear the strain any longer, Fumi made a decision. She couldn't stay there, trapped in a loveless marriage with her every move scrutinized. She decided to run away. She didn't tell anyone, not even Femi. She waited until the dead of the night, when the household was fast asleep, and she slipped out of the house, her heart racing with both fear and hope. The night air was cool against her skin as she made her way towards the edge of the farm, her bare feet silent on the earth. She felt a rush of freedom, a sense of finally breaking free from the cage that had held her for so long. But just as she reached the edge of the village, she heard the distant shout of the villagers. Someone had seen her, and soon a group was gathered, blocking her path. They dragged her back to the farm, ignoring her pleas and cries for mercy. Fumi's heart sank as she realized her escape had failed. They brought her before Odun, who stood there, his face dark with anger and betrayal. He stared at her, his eyes filled with a quiet fury that made her blood run cold. Why did you try to leave? He demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Fumi lowered her gaze, her hands trembling. She had no words to explain the misery she felt, the emptiness of a life she never wanted for herself. Odun, however, didn't need an explanation. He had seen enough, understood enough to know that his young bride's heart was not with him. After that night, things changed. Odun no longer tried to reach out to her, and Fumi retreated into herself, her spirit broken, her hope shattered. Her meetings with Femi became distant, reduced to stolen glances across the room, each one filled with regret and longing. But even as she faced the reality of her life, Fumi could not forget the taste of freedom, the brief moments of happiness she had shared with Femi. Her heart held onto those memories, even as her mind reminded her of the price she had to pay. And in the silent corners of her mind, she dreamt of a day when she could finally break free, find love, and live the life she had always wanted. As the month went on, Fumi learned to navigate her new reality. She performed her duties with quiet obedience, her spirit subdued but not entirely broken. Odun, seeing her subdued, felt a bitter satisfaction, as if he had won some unspoken battle. But deep down, he knew that her heart was still beyond his reach and her soul remained untamed. And so they lived, two strangers, bound by a marriage neither truly wanted. As the month wore on, Fumi knew that the inevitable was approaching. She had successfully avoided consummating her marriage to Odun for months, feigning headaches, exhaustion, and sometimes outright refusal. But Odun's patience was wearing thin. It was becoming clear to him, despite her politeness and dutifulness, she was keeping him at arm's length, withholding the bond that would truly make them husband and wife. One evening, after finishing her chores, Fumi sat alone in her room, lost in the thought. She managed to keep Odun's distance at bay with her endless array of excuses, but she could see that his patience was wearing thin. The quiet, simmering tension between them had turned to an unspoken ultimatum hanging heavy in the air. Morenike had noticed too, and one evening she came to Fumi's room with a gentle knock. Fumi, she began softly. I can see that something is weighing on your heart. Fumi met her gaze, her face clouded with sadness. She said to Morenike, I don't know if I can do this. Every time he touches me, I feel like a bird in a cage, wings clipped and trapped. It feels irritating. She glanced away, ashamed of her words. I know he's been patient, and I know what's expected of me, but how do I give myself to someone I don't love? Morenike took her hand, understanding her anguish. Fumi, marriage is not always easy, especially when your heart is not in it. But you must ask yourself if you have the strength to bear this life and fulfill what is expected of you. Otherwise, you will live in constant torment. Her voice was slow, and her words carefully permeated Fumi's heart. As the days slipped by, Fumi struggled with her inner conflict. She was raised to respect her elders, fulfill her duties, and honor her commitment. But everything inside her recoiled at the thought of surrendering her body to Mr. Odun. Yet, she also understood that refusing indefinitely could bring her harsh consequences, not just from Mr. Odun, but also from the village elders, who would see her actions as a grave insult. One evening, as the sun was setting over the field, casting a warm glow over the earth, Odun called her to the room. She felt a shiver run through her as she made her way down the dimly lit hallway. She knew what awaited her, and though she was afraid, she forged ahead. Odun sat waiting, his gaze softer than usual, but with an unmistakable determination in his eyes. Fumi, he said quietly, I have been patient, waiting for you to feel ready, to come to me willingly. But I'm an old man, and I want the joy of having a true wife by my side. Fumi lowered her gaze, her heart pounding as she stood before him, unable to look into his eyes. She felt the weight of his expectation and her own reluctance clashing within her, tearing her apart. I know you didn't choose this, Odun continued, his voice carrying a rare note of vulnerability. But we are not bound by marriage if we do not consummate. And I am asking you now to let me in, to give me this chance. With a deep, resigned breath, Fumi nodded slowly. Her head felt heavy, filled with a mix of resignation and silent acceptance. She realized that if she was to find any peace in this life, she would need to face the reality of her situation. Fumi felt a knot of dread in her stomach as she walked closer to where Odun waited. His face softened when he saw her willingness, though reluctant, as though he were a weary man finding solace at last. She lay beside him, stiff and tense, feeling more like an object than a person. Odun reached out, his hand rough and heavy, and she did her best not to flinch. She focused on the ceiling, letting her mind drift away as she reminded herself that she had to endure this, that life was full of sacrifices, and maybe, just maybe, this one would bring her peace eventually. Odun's voice, however, interrupted her thought. Fumi, he murmured, his tone almost tender. I know this isn't easy for you, but I'll do my best to be gentle. She nodded, forcing herself to relax as best as she could, though every fiber of her being ached to run from the room and find some open space, somewhere she could breathe freely. She tried to think of Femi, his muscular build, and his baritone voice that sends chill down her spine each time he speaks. His unmistakable touch that awakens her dying spirit. But as Odun's presence enveloped her, she felt herself drown back into the harsh reality of her life, trapped in a marriage she never wanted, bound to a man she barely knew. For a while, the room was silent, save for the quiet sounds of their breathing and the rustling of blankets. Odun's touch was surprisingly gentle, as if he sensed the weight of her misery and didn't wish to add to it. But no matter how soft he was, Fumi felt nothing but a deep, hollow emptiness. Thank you, Fumi, Odun whispered, not noticing her expression. He drifted into sleep soon after, leaving her awake, feeling the coldness settle over her heart. She remained motionless, her mind spinning with a flood of thought she couldn't hold back. She felt utterly alone, trapped in a life that felt foreign to her. Eventually, she slipped out of bed, wrapping a shawl around her shoulder as she made her way to the window. She gazed into the darkness outside, where the faint outline of the farm stretched out into the night. Somewhere in the distance, she thought of the life she had left behind. She quietly gave up her virginity to Mr. Odun that night, an experience that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Nothing about that night was a consolation. The hard, unlubricated penetration, the painful latching on her nipple, the grabbing and the turning, all felt like rape to her. She cried like a lost sheep, but Mr. Odun, strangely, for his age, rode on non-stop. Days later, as time passed, Fumi's spirit dulled further, becoming a shadow of her lively young self. She drifted through each day, tending to her duties, her face an unreadable mask. Odun would occasionally watch her, noting the hollowness in her eyes, the quiet resignation that had replaced the defiance she had once sensed in her. His dreams of finding joy and comfort in his marriage had faded, replaced by a deep disappointment. Still, he clung to the idea that in time she would accept her place by his side. But while Fumi tried to adapt to her new life, her connection with Femi simmered below the surface. Every fleeting glance and accidental brush of hands was a reminder of what could never be. It was a silent ache they both carried, and it felt as though they were bound together by their mutual sorrow. One late afternoon, Morenike called Fumi into her small kitchen. Morenike had a suspicion about the connection between her and Femi. She took a deep breath, carefully choosing her words. Fumi, my dear, this life we have here isn't an easy one, Morenike said, her eyes softening as she spoke. It's a quiet life, a hard life, but sometimes it's all we know. But you, I see how lost you feel. You are young. Your heart is still searching for something real, and I can see the struggle between you and Femi. Fumi's heart raced. She hadn't expected Morinike to notice, but there was no point in denying it now. She gave a slight nod, unable to meet her gaze. Morinike sighed deeply. I know what it is to love someone, but be bound to duty to another. My life with Odun's brother was similar. Sometimes we women are given little chance, little choice. But remember, love is a fragile thing. It's a flame that can give life or destroy it. Fumi looked up at Morenike, surprised at the depth of understanding in her eyes. She realized that Morenike, too, had her own unspoken sorrows, her own lost dreams. For the first time since coming to the farm, Fumi felt a sense of friendship with her. Morenike reached out, placing a comforting hand on Fumi's shoulder. Be wise, Fumi. Do what your heart must. But remember, the secret, if left too long, can tear everything apart. Over the following days, Morenike's words echoed in Fumi's mind. She knew she could no longer deny her feelings, nor could she keep living this life as a silent prisoner. She needed to confront her reality, no matter the cost. One evening, she found herself alone with Femi. They were in a secluded part of the farm, hidden among the tall trees where the sounds of the village faded into distance. Femi's face was etched with sadness, mirroring her own inner turmoil. Femi, she began, her voice trembling. I can't keep pretending. I can't keep pretending that this is the life I want. Every day, I feel like I'm fading away, like the person I was is slipping further and further out of reach. Femi's eyes softened, and he took her hand gently. Fumilayo, I would do anything to help you find happiness. But we are trapped, both of us, by this life, by expectations, by duty. They stood in silence, each feeling the weight of the life they were bound to. Finally, Fumi took a deep breath, making a decision that had been forming in her heart. Let us leave, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Let's leave this place and find our own path, far away from the eyes that will judge us. Femi looked at her, a mixture of fear and hope in his gaze. Fumilayo, are you sure? The consequences will be severe. I know, she replied, her voice steadier, but I can't live like this any longer. I would rather risk everything for a chance at real happiness than spend my days in this despair, she said. They embraced, holding each other tightly, feeling the strength of their shared emotions. They knew that living would be difficult, that they would be hunted down if they were discovered, but they were willing to take the consequences. The following days were a blur of whispered plans and cautious preparations. They gathered supplies and mapped out a path through the forest that would take them far from the village. Each day, Fumi's excitement grew, fueled by the hope of a new beginning. But just as they were ready to leave, disaster struck. Odun had grown suspicious of their secretive behaviors and had taken to watching them from the shadows. One night, as they prepared to slip away under the cover of darkness, he appeared in front of them, his face twisted with anger and betrayal. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? His voice filled with fury. Did you think you could run away with her, Femi, and steal the life I have worked so hard to build? You ingrate! Fumi tried to explain, but Odon slapped her. He ordered Femi to leave, banishing him from the farm and forbade Fumi from ever seeing him again. She was devastated, her heart shattered, but there was nothing she could do. She was back to being a prisoner. In her quiet moment, Fumi thought of Morinike's words, the warning that love, if left hidden, could destroy everything. She had wanted to believe that love was worth any risk, that it could conquer the limitations imposed on her. But now, as she faced the realities of her failed escape, she questioned whether the fleeting happiness she had shared with Femi had been worth the price. She won't see Femi again, not even the stolen glances. What a life. As the days turned to months, Fumi's life became a relentless circle of monotony. She would wake up at dawn, complete her chores in silence, and retreat to her room each night, shutting herself off from the world. Odun continued his attempt to draw her out, but he had long since realized that whatever spark of life had once been in her had been snuffed out. He knew she was there in body, but absent in every other way. One cold, misty morning, Morenike found Fumi sitting by the well, staring blankly into the water. Her eyes held a dullness that made Morenike's heart ache. Was she going to jump into the well? Fumi had once been so vibrant, full of dreams and laughter, and now she was but a shell of that person. Fumilayo, Morenike said gently, sitting beside her. I know it feels like there's no escape, like this is your only path. But sometimes, strength comes from the most unexpected places. Fumi gave her a faint smile, though her eyes betrayed her hopelessness. What strength are you talking about, Mommy? What strength? Fumi asked. My life was taken away from me the day my mother sold me off. My heart, it's like it doesn't beat the same anymore. Morenike's gaze softened, and she reached out to hold Fumi's hand and said, You see, sometimes the heart can mend, even after it has been broken 1,000 times. But you have to find something to live for, even if it's something small. Just as Morenike's words settled over Fumi, they heard footsteps approaching. Femi, who had been gone from the farm since the night Odun had banished him, appeared at the edge of the clearing, his eyes wide and darker, his face etched with bitterness and anger. Odun had ordered him to leave, but Femi had not gone far. He had taken up work at a nearby village. Fumi, he said softly, his voice a mixture of sorrow and determination. Fumi froze, her heart pounding at the sight of him. She couldn't believe he had returned. She rushed over and hugged him. Femi, you shouldn't have come back, she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. If Odun finds you, he will hurt you. Femi's jaw tightened. I don't care. Fumi, I don't. I can't watch you waste away here, trapped in a life that was never meant for you. Morenike placed a hand on his shoulder, her eyes filled with concern. Femi, this isn't wise. Odon's heart is hard, and his pride is fierce. If he catches you here, he may do more than just banish you. But Femi shook his head stubbornly. I would rather face his wrath than live knowing that Fumi suffers because of his choice made for her. She deserves freedom, even if I have to sacrifice myself to give it to her. Fumi looked between them, feeling torn. Her heart leaped at the thought of leaving, of escaping to a life where she could be free. But the fear of what could happen if they were caught weighed heavily on her. Femi held her gaze, his eyes burning with determination. Fumi, come with me. We'll find a place where Odun's power can't reach us. We'll start over, somewhere far from here. A mix of emotion surged within her: hope, fear, love, and dread. She wanted to believe in the dream Femi painted, but reality loomed like a shadow over her hopes. Yet, for once, Fumi felt a spark of defiance ignite in her chest. She had spent too long bowing to her mother's wishes, to Odun's authority, to the expectations society placed on her. She was tired of living a life defined by others. With a deep breath, she looked at Morenike, silently seeking her blessing. Morenike's eyes glistered with tears as she nodded. Go, child. If you have a chance to reclaim your life, take it. Some of us never had that choice. Go, and may your heart find the peace it seeks. Fumi took Femi's hand, feeling a surge of hope she hadn't felt in ages. Together they turned away from the farm and slipped into the forest, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of leaves. As they moved deeper into the wood, Fumi couldn't help but glance over her shoulder, half expecting to see Odun's furious figure looming behind them. But all was quiet. The trees swallowed them, offering shelter and hiding them from the eyes of the world. For the first time since her wedding day, Fumi felt a glimmer of freedom. The air was crisp and smelled of pine, filling her lungs with a refreshing scent she had long forgotten. But they had barely gone a mile when the silence was broken by a distant sound of horses. As the pounding of hoofs grew louder, Fumi's heart thundered in her chest, each beat mirroring the impending threat. Femi's grip on her hand tightened as he urged her to move faster. They stumbled over root and underbush, their steps erratic, driven by fear rather than direction. Phoebe, keep running, he urged, his voice low but insistent. We will lose them in the forest, he kept saying. Fumi glanced back, her breath quickening as she caught a glimpse of riders breaking through the trees behind them. Odun's men, with stern face and relentless determination, were closing in, their horses' strides eating up their distance. Odun's fury had clearly ignited a fire in these men. They wouldn't stop until they found her. Femi, we can't outrun them, she said, her voice trembling. Femi glanced around, eyes sharp and calculating. If we reach the river, that river there, he pointed, we might be able to throw them off our trail. The water will hide our scent, at least for a while. Fumi nodded, forcing her legs to move faster despite the ache building in them. Together, they tore through the undergrowth, weaving between trees and jumping over fallen branches. The forest sheltering them momentarily from the looming threat, but the sound of pursuit didn't waver. Odun's men pressed on. As they neared the river bank, the rushing water roared in their ears. It was swollen from recent rains. The current churning dangerously, but there was no time to hesitate. With one last glance at each other, they waded into the icy water, the shock making Fumi gasp. They crossed as quickly as the turbulence could allow, clinging to each other for support, the cold numbing their limbs. Reaching the far side, they scrambled up the muddy bank, slipping and grabbing onto rocks and branches until they emerged into solid ground once more. Exhausted, they ducked beneath a low hanging branch and crouched the shadows, barely daring to breathe. For a tense moment, they waited, listening. The thunder of hoofs had dulled, though voices floated faintly on the wind, angry and confused voices. They've lost the trail, Femi whispered, relieved. Softening his tone, he turned to Fumi, his gaze fierce. We'll rest here for a moment, but we'll have to keep moving. She nodded, leaning against a tree, her body aching and weary. Yet, despite that exhaustion, there was a strange excitement bubbling within her, a mix of defiance and the thrill of freedom. For the first time in a long time, she was choosing her own path, even if it was fraught with danger. Femi's eyes softened as he looked at her and he reached out to gently brush a stray leaf from her hair. Are you alright? Fumi managed a small weary smile. I'm okay. He returned her smile, a flicker of hope crossing his face. We'll keep running until we are far from here, Fumi. This time, no one decides your fate but you. Just as they began to plan their next step, a loud rustle in the nearby bushes snapped them back to reality. Fumi froze, her heart pounding, and Femi instinctively stepped in front of her, his hand reaching for the small hunting knife at his waist. But it was Morenike who emerged from the shadows, her eyes wide with worry and relief. She approached cautiously, a bundle in her hands. Femi, Fumi, she said in a hushed voice, glancing over her shoulder. You don't have much time. Odun has everyone searching the forest. I overheard him say he'd find you, no matter what it takes. Fumi stepped forward, shocked to see Morenike there. Mommy, why did you come? Morenike held out the bundle, her face grave. I brought you some supply. Food, water, and a few clothes. I don't know how far you'll get, but you will need this. Fumi's eyes filled with tears as she took the bundle, clutching it tightly. Thank you, Mommy, for everything. Fumi, I couldn't let you go without giving you a fighting chance. I can't judge you. I wish I had the courage to do what you're doing now. Femi nodded in gratitude, his face sober. Thank you, Mommy. Morenike looked at them both, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Just be careful. Odun would give up easily. He's a powerful man, and he's not used to losing. But Femi, listen to me carefully. Don't touch Fumi yet, until her bride price is returned to her mother. I don't know how that will happen, but I pray the gods will make it happen. It will be an abomination to sleep with another man's wife, more so your uncle's. I don't want curses on your head. Let's leave it all to God. With one last look of farewell, Morenike turned and slipped back into the shadows, leaving them alone once more. 3 months had passed since Fumi and Femi had left everything behind, and though they had finally found refuge in a village far from Odun's influence, they still lived with the shadow of their escape. They were afraid. Life had not been easy, but they had each other, and that alone gave Fumi the strength to rebuild herself piece by piece. They lived modestly, often struggling to make ends meet, but freedom brought with it peace that money couldn't pay. One afternoon, as Fumi was washing clothes by the river, Morenike's familiar figure emerged from the path leading to the village. Fumi held her chest, not with fear this time, but with a complicated mixture of relief and guilt. She hadn't imagined that Morenike would go to such length to find them. Morenike's warm smile softened the moment. Fumilayo! I come with good news, she began, her voice carrying an unusual gentleness and excitement. Femi, who had been nearby, came out when he heard his mother's voice. Morenike looked at them, taking a steadying breath. Odun has finally decided to let you go, Fumi, she said softly. He had formally divorced you. He sent me to tell you that he will not seek you out anymore, and you are free to live your life. Fumi's breath hitched as Morenike continued. He even returned the dowry to your mother and gave her some money to start a small business of her own. He wants you to know that he's releasing you from any obligation or fear. He only hopes you find peace and happiness that you deserve. The words struck Fumi like a bittersweet balm. She had feared the day Odon would come for her, that he would punish her severely, and yet he had chosen to let her go. Odun did love you for me, Moronike said softly, her eyes glittering. He realized in the end that holding on to you when you couldn't reciprocate would only destroy you both. It was hard for him, but he hopes you can find the joy that eluded you in his home. Tears slipped down Fumi's cheeks as she processed Morenike's words. The depth of Odun's kindness stirred something in her, a sorrow that mingled with gratitude. She had never wanted to hurt him, but her heart had been caged, suffocated by the life imposed upon her. And now he was offering her freedom that didn't demand anything in return. Fumi closed her eyes, whispering a silent prayer for Mr. Odun, a prayer that he would find someone who would love him fully without reservation. She felt a weight lifting from her heart, a lightness she hadn't known in years. Her mind drifted to memories of Odun's small act of kindness, his quiet patience, and she knew she would carry a piece of gratitude for him always. Morenike's gaze was still on them. Take this gift he's giving you for me. Live your life, love, and let go of the guilt. He has made peace with not being with you. As Morenike departed, Fumi looked at Femi, her heart swelling with newfound sense of possibility. She had lived through hardship, loss, and pain, but now, with Odun's final act of kindness, she could finally embrace her future. In that moment, Fumi made a promise to herself she would live a life of purpose, of love, and of gratitude for her freedom, for Femi, and for the generosity of a man she hadn't loved, but whom she would never forget. As Morinike prepared to leave, she shared one final piece of Odun's message to them. She looked directly at Fumi, her expression both tender and solemn. Odun asked me to tell you, she began carefully, that if at any point you and Femi ever find yourselves in need of a home, he is leaving one of his farmland in your name. It's a small place, but he thought it might give you both the means to start something new, to build a life with a solid ground beneath your feet. Fumi and Femi exchanged glances, a blend of surprise and disbelief lighting up their faces. The land was not just a plot, it was a lifeline, a gift Odun was offering to ensure they'd have a foundation for the life he knew they wanted to create. Femi placed a steadying hand on Fumi's shoulder, visibly moved by the gesture. I never expected that after everything, he would be this kind to us. And so, Femi and Fumi got married and lived a very happy life. They welcomed two children, a boy and a girl. And Mr. Odun finally married a widow in her late 40s, a woman that cherished him beyond measure. Letting Fumi go was worth it after all. He got the companionship he wanted. The love he bore in his heart finally found a worthy expression. Did you enjoy this story? Kindly subscribe, click the notification bell to be the first to know when another amazing story is made available. Tell me what you think about Wumi, the greedy woman, and Fumi's resilience. Did you think it was right for Femi to be liking his uncle's wife, or they just didn't have any choice? Let me hear your thoughts in the comment section. Kindly like and share so others will see this story. Till the next story, story lovers, enjoy your day. Bye.